Here on the Man from Story Mountain YouTube channel, you can learn ancient stories from Indigenous people, some more modern stories too, but also we share some real life stories, kind of things that I've done in my travels as a storyteller. I'll tell you right now about one of the most exciting things I've ever taken part in, which was back in the early 1990s, probably 1991, 92. I happened to be the national coordinator of Greenpeace Australia, and we were dealing with all sorts of campaign areas, from toxics to nuclear energy to atmosphere and deforestation, etc., etc. And we happened to receive this phone call from some of our colleagues who were trying to turn back the Japanese whaling fleet that year. It happened the Japanese that year had during the non-whaling season, they'd been improving their ships, not only making the ships faster, but improving also the radar, which meant when we got our ships down to stop them attacking whales, their ships were faster than ours, had better radar than we did. They could see us and they could see the whales before we could see them. So they had this huge advantage, and the very sad news went out that we, Greenpeace, were not going to be able to do anything to stop the Japanese whalers that particular whaling season. Well, I was sat there in my Sydney office. I had 180 trained, paid Greenpeaces in my unit, kind of underneath my direction, if you will, working as a team to work out what to do. Well, I got those 180 people, give or take, to ring Greenpeace members, not asking them for more money, asking them to phone up the Japanese embassy in Australia. This was in the early 1990s. There was no email, there was no internet. In fact, Greenpeace had the first website in Australia. It was greenpeace.au was the first Australian website anyway. No websites were around yet, we just had to phone. We got 180 Greenpeace staff to ring as many members as they could on the phones pretty much 24/7, ringing up and saying, hey, would you ring the Japanese embassy and turn back the whaling fleet? What happened was finally the Japanese embassy gave me a ring, and they called us eco-terrorists. Well, firstly, I pointed out to them, if anyone's causing terror on the seas, it's not us, it's their whaling ships. Secondly, we live in a democracy and all we're doing is making phone calls, right? But we could tell we were getting through to them. At which point I pretty much shifted half of my 180 staff to stop calling the Australian embassy and start calling the fisheries ministry in Tokyo in Japan itself. And we got a phone call from them, from Japan to Australia, saying they were getting so many phone calls, it was stopping them doing their more important work. We were blocking their phone lines and we had to stop. And I said to the obvious to them, I said, well, if you turn back the whaling fleet, we'll stop people ringing in and you can get on with the rest of your work. And it was a very exciting day, that very day following, when the Japanese whalers were turned away. It's beautiful to think of all those whales that are still alive, and all those little baby whales that never would have been born, because this was back in 1991, 92, right? Think of all those whales that were born and all those whales still alive, swimming out there in the ocean deep today because of that action we took back then in the 1990s. It's good to think about that sort of thing as you go through life.